Dr. Watkins is a professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work and director of the Vivian A. and James L. Curtis Center for Health Equity Research and Training. For many years, she has studied gender disparities in mental health over the adult life course using mixed methods research. Namely, her research focuses on generating new knowledge about the social determinants of health that explain within-group differences for boys and men, evidence-based strategies to improve the mental health of boys and men, and the intersection of age, culture, and gender. Dr. Watkins has received federal and private foundation funding for her research and has produced several peer-reviewed publications, book chapters, and volume sections. In addition to her research and teaching obligations, Dr. Watkins is also the founding director of the Gender and Health Research Lab, the certificate program in mixed methods research, and the Young Black Men, Masculinities and Mental Health YBMen project at the University of Michigan, which she will be talking about today. Thank you very much for presenting today, Dr. Watkins.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Let's see, should I go ahead and begin by sharing my screen? All right, folks, thank you for that. Like I mentioned earlier, I apparently am proficient in Zoom and didn't realize how I am unfamiliar with other platforms, but really like this one. So hopefully you've been enjoying the conference thus far. I'm really excited today to present some information, some data that I've been working on with my team over at the YBMen project, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a second. But the topic of today's talk is I want to share with you all some of the things that we've learned about using social media to help shape Black college men's mental health over the past few years. So I'm going to just jump right into it, and hopefully we have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. All right, so here are the talking points for today. So I've put together these 4 objectives just to guide our discussion. And certainly if you have questions about any of these as we go through, feel free to just jot them down. You can put them in the chat and we'll be sure to cover them at the end of today's session. So the first goal is I want to recognize or help you recognize the mental health challenges of Black men in general. Then we're going to hopefully get you to a place where you can describe the way masculinities, and I'm using that in a plural sense on purpose, but specifically the way masculinities and social support impact the lives of Black men. Then my goal is that you'll be able to acknowledge the importance of considering mental health, masculinities, and social support when you're working with Black college men. And then finally, the goal is to have you explore through this presentation and hopefully other resources that I can share at the end of the presentation, how the YBMen project promotes mental health, progressive definitions of masculinities and manhood, and social support specifically for Black college men. So I want to begin by just doing some tone setting. So I certainly don't need to tell this audience that the past, I say 12 months or even longer have been challenging on so many different levels, not just with the pandemic, but also the experiences of people of color. So here I just have a few headlines that we've seen over the past 12 months that speak specifically about the challenges that many Black men have faced in our country, being policed, being surveilled, and also having been murdered by law officers. And so that is definitely something that, in addition to the pandemic, that we've had to grapple with for not just the past 12 months, for decades, right? So this is certainly not new to this audience, but just in the spirit of doing some level setting and setting the tone for this talk, I want to just remind you that in the midst of the pandemic, we have not forgotten about the challenges that many Black men experience on a daily basis, just really concerned about their livelihoods and their families. But I think what has been at the top of everyone's list of discussion topics for the past 12 months has been the pandemic. And one of the articles that came out last summer that I really appreciated seeing was this one that I have on the screen here that really speaks to safety concerns that many Black men have had to deal with even over the past year with regard to wearing a mask, and this concern that Black men are already being perceived as a threat by so many people anyway, then having to wear a mask for obvious health reasons, that additional level of fear that they have, just being concerned that they're going to be targeted with regard to violence and things like that. And so yeah, I just really appreciated seeing this article last summer, because I think this was a topic that's come up with a lot of the Black men that we work with through my project. So now I just want to speak generally about some of the statistics, or as I call them, sobering statistics with regard to Black men's health. So what research has told us for the past 2 decades is that Black men tend to live less, or 7 years less than other racial groups, that Black men have higher death rates than women for all leading causes of death, that Black men, specifically those between the ages of 18 and 24, are less likely to report feelings of anxiety or depression. And not only having those feelings of anxiety and depression that they're less likely to report, but Black men are also less likely to seek help, be it informal or formal help, for some of their mental health challenges. Black men are also 5 times likely, or more likely, to die from HIV/AIDS, and suicide is still the number 3 leading cause of death for Black males ages 15 to 24. And so, after giving those sobering statistics, this is the part of the presentation where I usually ask audience members, especially those if we were, in person, to just ask yourselves, how do you see Black men? And normally in a face-to-face space, we would take a pause, and I would ask you to think about your friends, your classmates, your students, your family members, your community members, just people that you interact with on a daily basis. And how are you making determinations about Black men that you come across based on Black men you've worked with in the past, or who you may have known in the past? But it's just always, for me, a really great exercise to sit and think about, what kinds of judgments am I making about people, be they Black men or otherwise, about the future relationships I may have with Black men based on some of my previous relationships. And so, again, this exercise is one that I think is really valuable to do, particularly for those of us who are really concerned and want to invest a lot of time and effort into improving the lives of Black men more generally, and Black college men specifically. So some of my previous work has really looked at these experiences. It's really asked the question, what does mental health look like for young Black men? Also, what do the experiences of manhood and masculinities look like for young Black men? And also, when it comes to social support, what are some of the practices that Black men engage in when they're looking for help or trying to seek help, be it informal or formal help? And so I've published extensively on this topic over the past few years, looking at things like depression and psychological distress. And my work has included both qualitative and quantitative data, as well as mixed methods data. So I present this model because this is one of my earlier presentations or publications that I like to include in my presentations that really helps get a sense for why this experience for young Black men is so important to focus on, not just when they're young, but thinking about how does the life trajectory look like for young Black men after they've experienced a certain number of social determinants of health. And so this model here on the screen was published in the American Journal of Men's Health in 2012. And when I created this model, it was really to just organize 6 social determinants of health in a framework, and thinking about the adult life course of Black men and how do their experiences with things like socioeconomic status or stressors, identity that's shaped by race and masculinity, also kinship and social support, self-esteem and mastery, and then also quality health care. And how do their experiences when they're young, let's say between the ages of 18 and 30, how does that then dictate what their adult life course looks like beyond the age of 30? And so it's just really something I think to ponder is what kinds of experiences are they having at this younger adult age category, and how does that influence, for example, in middle adulthood, things like workplace stress or discrimination that they may experience in their workplace, And then as they get older, thinking about different kinds of milestones like retirement and having to live on a fixed income, and how those very specific indicators can be influenced by social determinants of health, and how they kind of play out throughout their family and friends, their schools and neighborhoods, community, workplace, and also just society as a whole. But in the context of today's presentation, we're really focusing on this young adult group. So again, that 18 to 30, and I'm going to talk specifically about those experiences in college in just a second. But before I do that, those who know my work know that I've had for about, I guess I'm approaching the 20th year now, very, very deep interest and investment in the experiences of Black men, young Black men in particular, but not just identifying what the problems are, but really trying to get a sense for what are the solutions, right? What are things that we can do to improve their living, learning, and working conditions over their life course, not just when they're young, but also as they age. And I think one thing that I've been really impressed by is how we've been able to use technology to think about ways to create health promoting programs for young Black men who are both in college and out of college, and thinking about how we can continue to modify these technologies to really improve their life experiences and their health. So now let's talk about what I would call sort of the three legs of my three-legged stool. So the first is mental health. And I want to begin by just contextualizing what I mean by mental health, because mental health is, I think, a topic that is very complex, as I'm sure you've been able to learn about during the Depression Conference for the past couple of days. And there are so many different factors to this. There are clinical disorders. There are those that I think lean more in the area of stress. But I just present this biopsychosocial model of mental health here just to illustrate that it is so much more complex than many of us could ever imagine. There are biological factors, or social factors, and psychological factors that all are sort of weaved in together that really help define and frame this experience for mental health for Black men, but also Black college men. And then specifically, what do I mean by masculinities? And in my work to date, I have really tried to use this plural form of the word to illustrate that there are multiple ways that men can demonstrate masculinity, that there's not just one or two ways. There is a continuum or spectrum of ways that masculinities can be performed, that they can be adhered to, and that can play out over the course of one's life course. I also like to say during this space that masculinities change over time. And so oftentimes whenever we're doing work with men, we tend to talk about masculinities that they may have been taught as boys or young adult men, and how just different life events have helped to shape how their masculinities evolve over time. And so the same types of gender norms, if you will, that some boys may adhere to or young men may adhere to when they're younger may likely change in middle adulthood and even older adulthood. And so it's really important to not see masculinities as something that's stagnant, and to really see that there is an evolution for many boys and men that occurs over their life course that you have to take into consideration to shape programs that can help them. And then finally, the third leg to this stool is really thinking about what we mean by social support. Now, unfortunately, the literature on social support for Black men, specifically young Black men, is actually really limited to date. I've been really fortunate to work with some up-and-coming scholars that are doing some great work around social support for Black men in particular, and Black college men, and so that literature will soon grow. But this is definitely an area that I think needs a lot more work. There have been some qualitative studies that have tapped into how relationships are formed, but I do think there are some gaps around what do we mean by social support? What do we mean by both informal and formal means of supporting Black men over the course of their lives? And so I just illustrate here that these kinds of groups are exactly what a lot of men are needing in college in order to succeed. They're needing to convene and needing to be supported and also be able to offer support to other Black men in these spaces. which is really interesting because I feel like as a society, we often don't talk about the socialization of support and convening for men anyway. We tend to do that a lot for women, but not so much for men. And so one of the underlying purposes of my work is to really change that narrative and really promote things like social support among Black men. So now, why the focus on Black college men? So from the very early years of my work, I've focused pretty narrowly on Black men, even from the years of my dissertation studying Black college men at a historically Black college and a predominantly white institution. And for me, the draw was this unique moment in society, this unique moment in time for them to deal with certain transitions to adulthood. And the aha moment for them, that realization that they may likely be faced with restricted opportunities. So thinking of college for many young people as a way out of their communities or as a way to really springboard themselves into a better life, but then facing, in many cases, just restrictions, brick walls, glass ceilings that prevent them from really holistically evolving into the adults that they want to be. And so I see that college space as a time and an opportunity and an area to intervene. And so this is one of the reasons why I think we do need to put resources and time into trying to do more work to support Black college men. So Black men and social media is something that I think I've had an interest in from some of the early days as well, mainly because when we think about how we talk about mental health, how we talk about manhood, and how we talk about social support, social media is so popular these days. And a lot of these conversations are happening on social media, whether we want them to or not. So things like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, which I am not proficient with yet, but hope to learn very soon, are ways that we see men, particularly Black men, demonstrating, performing, and really questioning things around their mental health, their masculinities, and social support. And so because of that, it really does raise the question, how can we use social media to do more work around learning about the experiences of Black men and Black college men, but then also promoting some of the wellness practices that we'd like to see these men take up? But I think a more direct question, for me at least, was what would happen if we use social media as a tool to improve mental health, to promote positive definitions of manhood, and increase social support for Black men? And this is really the underlying question for the Young Black Men, Masculinities, and Mental Health Project, or YBMen for short. And so in the remaining time I have, I'd like to introduce some of you and reacquaint others of you to the YBMen Project and some of the more recent work that we've been doing for the past couple of years. So first, we tend to enroll Black men who may be less likely to discuss sensitive topics face-to-face, whose distress has not yet reached clinical severity, and who want to have conversations about mental health, manhood, and social support in a private social media-based setting. And I note this because YBMen is not e-therapy. We don't offer therapeutic practice in YBMen. We do have 2 Black male clinicians who are on our team, but we tend to deal with men who are in the margins, who haven't yet reached clinical severity, but may be having some challenges. And certainly if we do see some red flags with the men that are in our program, we do refer them out to our Black male clinicians on our team. But for the most part, this is our eligibility criteria for enrolling in the YBMen Project. So just to give you a sense of what happens, right, from the moment someone says, I'm interested, we tend to take people through this process, this sort of path that you see on the left side of your screen here. We begin with a baseline interview and a baseline survey. So even before COVID happened and we were working from home, we've done a lot of these interviews via Zoom and Skype and Google Hangout. We also have a baseline survey that includes measures like the Conformity to Masculine Norms Inventory, or CMNI. We also use the PHQ-9 and the Gotland Male Depression Scale, which is a lesser known depression scale that tends to be more geared towards more sort of masculine normed terms around depression, things like feeling irritable and agitated and angry, whereas a lot of the traditional depression measures will use things like sadness, use terms like sadness and feeling blue. And so for our depressive symptoms measures, we use both the Gottland Male Depression Scale and the PHQ-9. And then we also use a social support measure, the ISEL. It's the interpersonal survey evaluation, or interpersonal support evaluation list. Sorry, I'm terrible with acronyms, but happy to share the reference if those of you are interested. And so we begin our process with these Black men by having them complete the interview and the survey. They did then receive a small incentive from us. We enroll those who are interested into the YBMen group, and depending on what year it is, depending on how we've tailored the group for that particular group of Black men on that campus, it could be delivered through Facebook or Instagram. We are also testing the possibility of creating an app right now, and so depending on what we decide, men will get enrolled into the group. They'll complete the group, and then at the conclusion, they will do another round of surveys and interviews of the same measures from the very beginning. Okay, so this is the process, and what I'm going to present now is just some snapshots of the data from our 2018 iteration of the YBMen project. So in 2018, we had about 350 Black college men complete our survey. About 40 self-selected into the YBMen program. So we pulled those guys out, and we made specific groups actually in Facebook for these different guys, and we placed them in the program. Now, what exactly does a YBMen program look like? So what I have here on the screen is just a sample curriculum for YBMen. So this is a sample 7-week curriculum, and you see from this screenshot here that each week has a theme. We begin with an introduction and an orientation to YBMen. And for this particular curriculum, we covered racial identity in the first week, masculine identity, mental health, well-being, and social support was our last content week. And then we used week 7 to just do some review and some wrap up. Now, one of the things you'll notice about this layout here is that there may be some familiar people that you see here, some NBA athletes, some music artists, some actors, and even some social justice and social rights figures that have come across our screens in the past couple of years. And so one of the pluses, or I think the draws for YBMen for many of our participants, is the fact that we do this. We actually use social media and popular culture prompts in order to create content for the YBMen project. So when we talk about things like racial identity, we may pull different actors or scenes from movies or YouTube clips to actually illustrate the point that we're trying to convey that week. We do the same thing for masculine identity, mental health, well-being, and social support. And so the idea here is not to just use a cookie cutter model of these different topics and helping to promote and educate our YBMen participants who are Black men. We're not just using materials that currently exist in terms of like different mental health programs. We're actually modifying, and we're taking content that they already receive on a daily basis, right? That they're looking at already on social media, songs that they're listening to, and different movies that they're watching, athletes that they admire. We're actually pulling content directly from what's happening right now. And we're modifying that content. We're tailoring it specifically to educate these Black men about mental health, manhood, and social support. And so I showed this just to illustrate the kinds of things that we tend to create. So that's a sample 7-week curriculum. I also wanted to show just a quick little snapshot of a sample 12-week curriculum where we do extend some of these topics beyond 1 week. And so we've addressed in the past things like academic performance and mental health literacy, even things like masculine norms and Black masculinities. And so there are different ways that we tailor the YBMen curriculum to fit the different campuses that we partner with. Now, I hadn't said this yet, but this is definitely something that I think needs to be said. Whenever we do a YBMen program and we partner with a campus, we truly act as partners. So we co-create the material, we co-create the topics, and we work directly with our campus partners on trying to figure out what kinds of topics and what kinds of content would be most relevant to the Black men on their campus. So again, not the cookie cutter model. We go above and beyond to really brainstorm and think deeply about what kinds of content would be most relevant and can really make a difference with their Black male students. So what does the YBMen experience look like? And so I decided to blind some names here so that we can protect our participants, but I wanted to just share with you some screenshots on the iPad here, so you can see the kinds of topics that we've covered over the past couple of years. For example, as many of you know, Colin Kaepernick's decision to take a knee during the national anthem has been a hot topic for many years and has influenced his football career. We talk about things like that in these YBMen Facebook groups. So we do have an opportunity to just unpack what's happening in popular culture and around the country as we're talking about things like mental health, manhood, and social support. We also talk about music, right? We look at music videos on YouTube, we analyze song lyrics, we rethink some of the messages that are being conveyed in popular culture references. And so the guys really like this opportunity to dig a little deeper into some lyrics that they may not have paid close attention to or really didn't think about how those lyrics may have impacted their own mental health, manhood, or social support. And then we talk about college. You know, these are Black college men, and so naturally we talk about the transition to college for many of them. Some of them are first generation students, others are not. But regardless, we talk about what kinds of skills can be translated from back home to college. We talk about what the experiences are like. We also talk a lot about what their needs are and how the universities that they attend can better help meet the needs for their success. So at the end of the slide, I created tables and things like that, but I was concerned that I may run short on time. So overall, speaking to the 2018 iteration of the YBMen project, we did find that over the course of the intervention between our pre-test and our post-test, that depressive symptoms did decrease for our Black college male participants, that we saw increases in progressive masculinities. So we saw lower scores on the conformity to masculine norms inventory, which is our measure for traditional masculinity. And we also saw the guys really excited about the next steps with regard to social support and what that looks like for them. You know, it was no longer considered weak to actually ask for help and to really seek out opportunities to connect with other Black men and other students on campus for their success and their well-being. And again, I do have some data slides that I could show, but in the interest of time, I really wanted to dig into some other information for the remaining time today. So first, just an overview in terms of YBMen by the numbers, and then I'd like to share a few quotes from some of our previous participants. But in terms of what we've done since 2014, we have connected with about over 500 Black college men in the Midwest. Over 100 of them, or 100 of them, have been able to participate in the intervention. About 92% who have actively or have participated in the intervention. So out of the people who've enrolled, about 92% have been really active, meaning they're, you know, posting things, they're liking things, they're sharing things right there in the social media group. And we work with about 5 campuses to date. And in terms of our outcomes, 2 is our average number of points depression scores have decreased between baseline and post-intervention. So we are seeing the needle move. We're seeing these Black men's symptoms go down, and we're truly seeing a change between between the pre-test and the post-test, with the intervention obviously happening in between. So now I feel like you've heard enough from me. I want you to hear a little bit from the guys who've participated. And so from our 2018 iteration, I want to share just a few quotes that came from that iteration. So when we discussed with these men what the meaning of mental health and depression was for them, one guy said, "When I think of depression, I think of it across a spectrum. I think a lot of times when people talk about depression, we only talk about it in the most severe stage of it. We don't talk about the early phases of it and other forms of mental health challenges that can lead to depression. So I think there are 2 very complex issues and words, And I honestly don't know if there is one real definition to define them. And so what I appreciated about this gentleman is that he acknowledged the complexity of mental health and depression. The reason why this is so germane to the work that we do is because in my earlier work, I've even published on this, and that is that we found that for many Black men, the terms like mental health and depression and stress were used synonymously, meaning that when you ask them about one, they would give you the definition of a different term. And so just really unpacking what this means for Black college men is going to be so important as we think about how to intervene and what strategies to use to intervene. So mental health literacy is a major topic that comes up, and I think a great way for us to enter into these conversations with Black college men. Another quote that came out of the intervention from 2018, as we talked about masculinities and manhood, as one gentleman said, "From my personal experience, I think Black men's experience with masculinity is more severe than some other cultures. I feel like other cultures, especially white cultures, are more likely to talk about counseling and getting professional help or talking to a therapist with their children growing up versus in the Black community. It's like, no, you deal with it. You go deal with it on your own. You don't let things that happen to your family get outside the family." And this was a resounding comment made by many of our Black male participants. They said that they grew up in a house where what happens in the house stays in the house. So just thinking about the cultural implications of that and how people growing up hearing that, I mean, I myself heard that growing up as a child. And what does that mean when you get to a place like a college or a university and you truly need some help? You know, so just thinking about the cultural foundations and the cultural adaptation to what does it look like, or what kinds of steps should we be taking to really show Black men that these are times where they should ask for help, right? It's not as simple as it may seem for some people, because it's almost having to relearn a way to function. And so I just really appreciated seeing this come out of our work. Another quote, specifically on the topic of stress, is one man said, "They call stress the silent killer that will build up and that eats away at you over time." Also, in a land where you're supposed to be able to do things such as protest freely in a peaceful manner, you have people saying you can't do this. Many see other people getting away with other types of activities and just not being condoned for it. And I remember this participant, and I remember him just separating the things that Black men do from the things that everybody else does, right? It could be the same activity, but just the way that Black men do it in that body, in that space as both Black and male, can look and be received completely different as someone who possesses another identity. So just thinking about not just the experiences, but how it's perceived, how they are perceived, is something that's really key as we think about our work with Black college men. And then I think this is the last one. How do they like YBMen overall? One guy said, "What you guys are doing, the actual program and trying to spread awareness about mental health to Black men, I think it's really good." Another gentleman said, "The YBMen group was definitely a safe space where you could talk about your ideas as Black men and talk about your opinions on things without judgment, without backlash. Because this was a private group, only we could see what we were saying. It just felt good. And it showed me what having a support group would be like." So there is definitely something to be said about convening and socializing men to convene and making it normal, normalizing this opportunity to come together and just unpack the various experiences during this very important part of their lives. So as I begin to wrap up, just wanted to give you a sense for what we have done to date and what lies ahead. So to date, we've done the YBMen project mostly with community college, undergraduate, and graduate Black male students between the ages of 18 and 30. We've also pilot tested an intervention through Instagram at a middle school in Detroit. And we are in the process right now of actually testing a high school version of YBMen. Now, the reason why we were really interested in doing the middle school and high school versions is because in our work with the college men, So many of them said, I wish I had gotten this information sooner. Like I could have used this information around mental health, masculinities, and social support in middle school or when I was in high school. So if I could have learned this stuff earlier, I could bring this into college and be a little bit more prepared for what lies ahead. So we are going to go back a little bit in thinking about life course and start a little earlier with this work and see what kind of seeds we can plant at those earlier ages that maybe we can nurture a little bit later in their development. And so what lies ahead in addition to pilot testing and moving forward with doing some interventions in the middle and high schools is we're also scaling YBMen to more colleges and universities all across the country. We're even doing an iteration in Toronto, Canada here soon. And we just received some funding in Australia to actually do a YBMen version or YBMen iteration with Aboriginal and Indigenous men. And we're growing our technical assistance center here at the university to support all of these efforts that we're trying to do with YBMen. And just last summer, we wrapped up our 70-page manual that is going to really help guide a lot of these colleges and universities into supporting their Black college men in the years to come. And so I wouldn't be me if I didn't give you some takeaway points. So I'm sure we have a ton of different people on the line here. So I just want to leave you with 10 points, 10 tools of the trade I think we should all consider when working with Black college men. So number one, be sure to expound on the services that they use. You know, sometimes it's not enough to have a multicultural center. It's not enough to have a Black male group. You have to dig a little deeper to see exactly what are their needs and in what ways can we support those needs. Another piece of advice or a recommendation is to give vulnerable subgroups of Black men specialized attention. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper into sororities and fraternities, sometimes athletes, sometimes even first-generation students or religious groups are great opportunities to intervene in a space where they already feel like they have something in common beyond race and gender with the students that they're working with. You have to absolutely account for gender role adherence. Not all Black men are the same. And so you definitely have to think about in what ways do they adhere to certain gender norms and how can we shape programming to support what those gender norms look like. You also have to account for intersectionality, looking at the way they've interacted with systems or engaged with systems over the years as Black men is so important to keep in mind as we're creating these programs for them and making them better. Also, I'm sure my hope is that many of you are here because you want to be educated and trained on how to engage with your Black students and your Black male students. And so I think the more support that we can offer to these campus staff and faculty and others, I think the better. You want to involve more Black men in campus programs. So have them sitting at the table with you, right? Like don't assume, don't stereotype, don't watch TV, don't ask your friends, have them sitting right there at the table and helping you shape the programs. And like I mentioned earlier, this is one of the cornerstones to YBMen as we co-create with our campus partners these kinds of curriculum ideas and these materials without assuming that we know what's best for Black men. We let them tell us what they believe is best for them. Use health advocates that work. Now, this is a really important piece of advice because sometimes, again, sort of in the area of assumptions, we think that having certain people as spokespeople for college student mental health, or in this case, Black college men's mental health, sometimes we think that's a good idea without yet asking these guys, who do you want to hear from? Who are some of the people who you would admire and like to serve in these roles for you? So don't make assumptions. Be sure to get a sense for what they prefer. Also, go where Black men live, learn, and work. So I can just tell you from my experiences working with several campuses in the Midwest, Having a counseling center is fantastic. Having a multicultural student center is fantastic. Having these groups on campus is fantastic, but sometimes you have to go to where the men are. So sometimes it's going to residence halls and apartment buildings. It's going to classrooms. It's visiting them in spaces where they work and where they frequent to just get a sense for, how can you connect with them? What's the best strategy to really and fully engage them in their experience? And also, what do they think could help make their experience better? One of my favorites, leveraging social media and technology. So thankfully, we've been doing YBMen virtually from the very beginning. So from 2013, 2014 on, YBMen has always been online. It has been through social media. As you can imagine, since the pandemic hit, we're seeing a lot more interest from college campuses about how they can engage men and other students of their campus in their programming. And so any way that you can leverage social media and technology, I'm sure is the better. And what I found is that a lot of men have preferred this from the very beginning because they can cut back a little bit on the stigma that they would have experienced walking into a counseling center or walking into a space and saying, I need help. So some of the men have really liked that for YBMen, we encourage them to create avatars. And we encourage them to create fake names or social media accounts that are not tied to their personal account. Whatever it takes for them to feel like they are in a safe space where they can fully engage with us around content dealing with mental health, manhood, and social support. And then finally, considering a life course approach in your work with Black men. One of the pieces of advice that I gave one campus is just to remember that they had lives before they got to your campus and they will have lives after they leave your campus. And so just taking into consideration what those experiences may have been before they landed there at your campus, and just thinking about that in context and how can you help to nurture these guys as they're moving on beyond graduation. So, few points here, wrapping up. Just remember that Black men are resourceful and are resilient, right? And so I think whatever we can do, whatever is in our power to support them around their mental health, masculinities, and social support on our campuses will be key. Just remember to involve them. And so with that, I'll just leave you with just some publications that have come out around the YBMen project. This one at the very bottom here is our most recent one. I don't know if you can see it. Okay, there it is. The bar went away. But that's our most recent one that came out last summer in the American Journal of Men's Health. And I will go ahead and end there and just thank a few folks here, the Vivian A. and James L. Curtis Center for Health Equity Research and Training, the Depression Center that believed in me very early in this idea and supported me in some of the pilot work for the YBMen project. Also the School of Social Work, the Steve Fund, who has also supported this work, as well as the Skillman Foundation, and naturally the YBMen project team, that they are the golden standard as far as I'm concerned. They are the dream team and the folks that really make this work happen. So I'm so thankful for them in this effort. If you'd like to contact me, there's some information there. I am on Twitter. It is my social media drug of choice there. And also you can visit the YBMenproject.com website, or you can email me if you have any questions after we've had a chance to chat. So with that, hopefully I've left plenty of time for questions, but I am happy to take them. Okay, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think I did that correctly.
Dr. Watkins?
Yes.
Okay.
So what's the best way to take questions here? Let's see. Oh, great. I see some in the chat. So is it okay if I just jump right in?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Okay, let's see. I see first one here from Amy. Would love to know the name of the masculine depression scale. Yes, the name is the Gottland Male Depression Scale, the GMDS. Gottland, I'm actually going to type it in, Male Depression Scale. It's really popular outside the US, believe it or not. I find that it was created, I believe, over in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, but I really like to use this with the PHQ-9 whenever I'm doing work with Black men, because I think it's a nice contrast to a scale that's widely used here in the US and elsewhere, but then it also has, the Gotland has these other, what people would say, sort of male friendlier terms in the measure. And so I like to use both just to get a sense for which one best captures what it is I'm trying to learn from Black men. All right. Great question here from Najea. What is the reason for enrolling men in YBMen whose mental health has not reached clinical severity? Thank you. Great question. The reason why we don't enroll men whose depression has reached clinical severity is because so the YBMen project is meant to be a mental health education and social support program. So it's meant to be an educational program, not teletherapy or not e-therapy. We do have interest in the future of building in some cognitive behavioral therapy components in YBMen. We do have some clinicians on our team that are helping us work through that. It's just at this stage, Najea, we're not interested in delivering e-therapy through YBMen. So that's why we actually prefer to work with guys who have not been diagnosed yet. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have licensed clinical therapists on our team who happen to be Black men who we've referred our participants to, who maybe did flag as having depression, and they've been able to support those participants. All right. Have you only tried to use Facebook for your research? No, Ross. Okay, Ross, you caught me. You called me out. So what's interesting is that Facebook is certainly, I think, it was probably like cooler back when we first started, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I've had many Black men tell me, Facebook, my grandmother's on Facebook. I don't wanna use Facebook. But you know, Facebook has been a really helpful platform for YBMen, given its functionality, given what it allows us to do. But like I mentioned, we've also done the work in Instagram, and we have a prototype now to do the work in places like Twitter and LinkedIn and other spaces. And also we're trying out the idea of an app, but we're in the middle of an Android versus iPhone fight right now, which is holding that up. And so guys are not always thrilled about Facebook, if I'm being honest with you, but a lot of them are thrilled about the program, and so are willing to use the Facebook group because they really like our program. But you're right, Facebook is kind of old now for many spaces and for many people, but that's why we've created prototypes for these other platforms as well. In your data, what is difference between? Thank you, Christine. Good question. So when I say that we have served over 500 Black men, what I mean is that over 500 Black men have met our team, have completed our surveys, have received educational materials broadly. But over 100 of those people have said, I want to be in YBMen. I want to be a participant. So the over 500 number is we've engaged with those guys on campus. They've come to our booth. We've talked to them. Some of them have talked to our team members, but only, well, I don't want to say only because I feel like it's a large number, but over the 100 that I mentioned earlier have actually fully been participants in YBMen and done pre and post tests and been exposed to the intervention. Thank you for that. I'm happy to clarify that. All right. Oh, thank you, Jody. We can talk more about what this program can look like for middle school, for your middle school son. What's funny is that we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've tested this with middle schoolers and Instagram, and they loved it. One thing that we learned about middle school boys is that the shorter the program, the better. You know, thinking about working with 13 to 15-year-olds, we learned that they were not invested in a 7 or 12-week program. They wanted something really short. So our pilot, I think, was 2 or 3 weeks, but we found it to be incredibly effective for the boys that we work with in Detroit. Right. So Danette, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I am familiar with other examples of support groups. In fact, one member of my team has gone on to do some really deep literature searches and field scans of what does support groups look like in social media. But you know what's interesting is it's really hard to track support groups or groups in general via social media because there are so many types. And some of them are open. YBMen just so happens to be private. So a lot of people will try to search for YBMen. You can't find it if you search for the group. You may just find our fan page. But it's so difficult to kind of pin down these groups. So I'm familiar with other groups, but it's just really hard to define these groups because they mean different things to different people. But I don't know if that answers your question, Danette, but feel free to let me know if you want me to expound. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that it is exciting for groups who don't want to seek counseling or who are just not open to it. I think that's one of the reasons why we were so excited about the positive reactions we've had to YBMen, because YBMen has almost been a springboard for that, you know, talking about mental health literacy and talking about what terms do you use and how do you articulate what you're experiencing, what you're feeling as a Black man has been really helpful for our participants. And a few of them have gone on to seek professional counseling, professional therapy, because they feel like I now have a language, you know, I now know how to articulate what I'm going through. And if, you know, YBMen was the reason for that, I think that's great. I'm not going to take any credit. I'm going to take, or I'm going to assume it came from really just being with these other men and really, you know, working with one another to unpack how to explain what it is they're going through. Okay, and moving down here. Yes, thank you, Virgin. Yes, I agree, Amy. So many misconceptions surrounding the topic and lack of support. I agree. Okay, let's see. Moving down the questions here. Yes. So I hope I'm saying your name right. I don't know if it's Cerise, but Carrington. I'm going to call you by your last name. I absolutely think there are race and gender undertones to depression scales. I think, you know, when these kinds of scales were originally created, I would probably bet that they were not created with people of color in mind. They were probably not created for some of the populations that I use them for in mind. And so I imagine words like sad and blue may not be able to connect with people as much as, you know, we'd like for them to. But I see your point about it being stereotyped of Black men as well, right? Like we talk a lot about the angry Black men and the angry Black woman. I think when people created the Gottland Male Depression Scale, I think they were trying to use what they thought were less feminized terms, like sad and blue, feeling hopeless and worthless, like everything's an effort. And instead, I think they were trying to base their scale on what the research said about the way men express themselves. So things like feeling irritable and angry and agitated are words that you may see in the Gottland Male Depression Scale. But, you know, now that you bring it up, I could see that there's a racial undertone to that as well, possibly. What's interesting is that I've never thought about it as stereotyping Black men. I've more so thought about it as a way to help them understand what it is they're feeling. And if men or Black men in particular are able to connect with irritable or agitated or angry and not sad or blue, I'm okay with that for the purposes of intervention. You know, I'm okay with that with the purposes of springboarding us, getting us started to have a conversation about what does that mean for you? What does anger and irritability and agitation mean for you? So that's really good. It's a really great point. I'm gonna give that some more thought too. Okay, how does the project tackle issues and concerns surrounding confidentiality? Yes, so we do have to deal with this. You know, we've run all of our interventions through our institutional review boards, our IRB. We talk a lot with the guys about confidentiality. We talk a lot with them about being anonymous. We support and actually even teach them how to create alias accounts in Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, should they decide to do that. But so far, so good. We guarantee private groups, so none of the information that we share gets out of our group. But to date, that has been what we've done, and that has seemed to work. Yeah, great questions. Please keep them coming. And I don't know if folks can unmute or not, but If you can, feel free. If not, keep typing questions. Great question, Aaron. How do we plan to roll out the train the trainer model? We have so many ideas for how to do this. So before COVID hit, we were planning to do a 2.5-day training for any college or university officials who wanted to come to Ann Arbor, pay a dollar amount and receive, a packet of information where we could show you, you would learn like firsthand from those of us who implement the project, how to go about designing, implementing, and evaluating the program at your campus. COVID hit, we started working from home, and that plan got held up a little bit, but we were definitely thinking that that would be the best way to do it, is to have people come on site and learn in 2.5 days how to create a YBMen-like project or program on the campus. And then we would support those people over the course of the program, like, what am I trying to say? We would support the people who came to campus after they returned to their campus using an online community forum, where we would upload resources and different kinds of things you could use as you're implementing your YBMen project in real time. So that was the plan. And then COVID hit and a few things got shifted around. But if folks are really interested in that kind of model, I mean, I definitely think we can talk about what that could look like. All right. So I think we have 1 minute left, and so feel free to contact me if you have more questions, and follow me on social media. I'm getting the, I guess the metaphoric music, so I guess it's time for me to start wrapping up. But thank you so much for your attention, folks. I hope to stay in touch with many of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.